When you're working with maps, it's helpful to turn off this button, Show End Result. This works a lot like this button does in the modifier stack. Show End Result within the material editor refers to the end result of the material hierarchy. By turning this off, I'm able to see the result of this pattern up to this point, but no further. Now I can check out the actual pattern that I'll be mapping onto the geometry. It's a simple 4-square checkerboard pattern. The pattern itself is controlled down here under checker parameters. It has 2 colors, and the transition between the colors can be softened with this optional parameter. To be different, I'll change color number 1 to blue. Now, in order to get that pattern onto the geometry, we use a type of mapping that's controlled with the coordinates rollout. There are 2 types of coordinates: texture or environment coordinates. Environment coordinates refer to anything outside of your model, and there are several types of mapping for simulating an environment. We'll talk more about that later. Most of the time, you'll be using texture mapping, and this allows you to get your pattern onto an object. And there are different types available here for texture mapping. Most of the time, you'll be using an explicit map channel to perform a texture map. But I'd like to hold off on explaining how that works right now. Instead, let's try this last option because it's the easiest to understand. Planar from World XYZ. I'll use real world scale. And I'd like to see that in the viewport, so I'll turn on this button. Right now we're looking at an object that's 24 feet square, and our pattern measures 4 feet by 4 feet. So it's tiling or repeating a total of 6 times in both directions. And you can see that here. This is one instance of the checkerboard pattern. We can change the size here. Let's say that this is 6 feet. What that does is it stretches out the pattern so that it takes 6 feet to display that pattern, and it stretches it out this way so that we only get 4 repetitions. Now sometimes you might not want to use real-world scale. For example, let's say that we want to get the pattern to appear just once on this surface. We would uncheck Use Real-World Scale. And look at these values that show up here. They're very low numbers. In fact, to get it to show up just once, you have to change these numbers to 0.001 and do that in both directions. And that will allow you to see the pattern one time in both directions. Now, we can't see it up here anymore. I might as well toggle the end result back on, and we can see how that's wrapping around the sphere. Now here it might be more appropriate to use a cube to preview the image. Because we're using world coordinates, this pattern is locked to the XYZ coordinates of world space. That means that if we rotate the object or move the object, it will move within this texture space. Another option is to use planar from Object Xyz. This is a little bit more sophisticated because it uses the local coordinates of the object to generate the pattern. Here I might need to adjust some things here to get it to show up. Let's use real world scale again and try to get it back to where it was. Let's use 4 feet by 4 feet, and we can start to see something there. Perhaps this one tiles differently. Indeed it does. In this local system that uses the object coordinates, tiling is accomplished with values of 1 and 1 rather than 0.001. So the advantage here is that we can move the object around or rotate it, and the pattern is not locked to world space anymore. Rather, it travels with the object.